Kia ora koutou and welcome to this preview of Red Dust Rebellion, my game coming out by GMT Games. We've been quiet for the last 6 months and that's because we've been doing testing and the game's in pretty good shape. People Power, the coin game ahead of us in the queue, is either going to the printers or has gone to the printers when this video is being recorded, or it's very close to. And because GMT is not the hugest company in the world, there's a small pipeline for when games are getting produced. And People Power always had to come out before Red Dust Rebellion. So we are testing away and getting things ready so that when it's our time to go to the printers, we have everything a-okay. Now I'm quickly going to run through a bunch of parts of the game so you can have a look at where we're at and get an overall feel for how a game of Red Dust Rebellion would work. Let's start off with the map. Now first thing you might notice about the map is it's broken into multiple different parts. We've got on the left here Tharsis Montes, on the lower right Hellas Planitia, and up the top we've got Arabia Terra. These are different parts of Mars, like different focus points for the game. You can move between them, but they are geographically quite remote from each other. In between those regions you have the wilderness, and the wilderness is an area which represents the rest of the landmass of Mars, which is a massive area. If you discount the oceans on Earth, the landmass of Mars and Earth is roughly the same, so this is a really big space. And over here we have Earth, the Aldrin Cycler, and Phobos. So in Red Dust Rebellion, Mars is not self-sufficient. Supplies do need to come from Earth. They go past the Aldrin Cycler, which is a very complex system involving big ships being slung around huge orbits between Earth and Mars. And then those supplies go to Phobos, which are then deployed onto Mars itself. Big part of the game is managing this supply chain. On the board itself, you'll see a bunch of different information. First of all, there are two main types of regions. There are the external, lightly populated regions, and then these big circles represent labyrinths, which are massive underground cities on Mars. The population in a region are these green squares. So as you can see, Tenzing Labyrinth has 3 population at the moment, whereas Syria Planum and Pavonis Mons only have 1. But there's a grey space, and that's where you can add additional population. Additional population can either come from refugees from other displaced areas, or from new people arriving from Earth. For the government player and the Red Dust player, they want to build support or opposition to the government, and that's based on population. So here down in Shepherd, there's currently 2 population and passive opposition. That's 2 points for the Red Dust player. If they had active opposition, they would get ×2 that, so they would get 4 points for holding here. So currently, the government player has 6 points towards their victory goal because they have active support in 3 population Tenzing. If Tenzing was to get an increase in population, this would be with 8 points. But if that flipped over to active opposition, that would be 8 points for Red Dust. You might also notice that there are blue lines connecting the cities. These are MacLeods, and they allow for fast movement between the cities. The dotted line up here, that's where you can build the Rodgers line, which is a currently incomplete MacLeod line that you can build during the game. Another thing to note on the map are the spaceport icons. If you control 2 spaceports, you can actually move between those areas quite freely. Due to fighting and other effects, you can get damage in an area. Now, if this area is damaged, it loses its spaceport, but it also creates 1 population that moves over to this area over here, which is currently the displaced or unhoused population. There's a lot of incentive to house these people because they are points for both the government and the Red Dust players. Also on the board, you might notice that there are these 2 spots in each of the desert areas. These are where bases are located, and a lot of the bases have double sides. So in this case, the Red Dust player's base here would be counted as dug in. A region can only hold 2 bases, except of course the wilderness, which can hold 6. Next up, let's look at the basic flow of the game. So the core of the game revolves around these event cards. The one on the right is the current card. This is the one that will be played. The one on the left is the upcoming card, so you have a bit of notice about what's about to happen. Along the top of the card, you'll see an order of activation for the different players. So in this case, the Mars government player is the first player to get an option on this card. Then Red Dust, then the Corpse, then the Reclaimers. The first player can always pass and get a little bonus for doing that, or they can choose one of these 3 options along here. Now they can choose an operation and special, or to play the event. Operations are your basic actions. Think of it as a standard thing you would do in a normal game, like recruit, or move troops, or do an attack. One of the different things in Coin though, is if you choose to do an attack, you can attack in multiple areas if you can afford to do it. Adding the special activity allows you to add in a special extra bonus to your action. And then the final one is choose the event. Now, a lot of the cards will have a shaded and unshaded event. Normally the unshaded event helps the government player and the corp player, and the shaded version of the event helps Red Dust and the Reclaimers. The tricky thing here is whatever action the first player takes, the second player may take the action immediately connected to it. So over here, if the Martian government decides to do an op and a special activity, that means that the Red Dust player can play this event. And if you look at this event card, transfer up to 10 Martian government resources to Red Dust players, or return all pieces in transit to the supply. The Martian government player might not want to do that, so they might select that option instead. And that means that the Red Dust player could choose a limited op. Now, as I said before, operations you can do in multiple spaces. A limited op is one action in one space. So Red Dust might potentially pass on that, because they'll be first to play on the next card. Now, any factions that did play on that card move to the ineligible factions for the next card. This card is discarded, and then the next one is revealed. So let's just reset this briefly. Now, one of the tricky things here is that the Reclaimers will appear last on every single card, but what they can do is they can spend one of their resource cards to essentially jump the queue. So by spending a 4, which is one of their highest resource cards, they can jump to the top of the order, and instead of on long range patrols it being Red Dust first, the Reclaimer player can choose to go first. So they might do that so that Red Dust can do the event. Now, it's this card system and the cycling of events and resolving them that is the core of Red Dust Rebellion's gameplay. Another little tiny thing to note is when you reveal one of these cards, it has this little lightning bolt symbol here. That is the flashpoint track. So this one advances the flashpoint track 1. When this gets to the end, a flashpoint will happen, and that's like a small reset in the game where things on the cycler will advance one step along, and you'll be able to put more stuff on the cycler. And a few other things happen, so unsupported troops out in the desert might get taken away as well. Now, you might have noticed these white cubes. They're Earth government forces, and they're not directly owned by any one player. Over here we have the EarthGov confidence track, and this is how confident EarthGov is in the Martian government controlling the war. If the marker is down the bottom like this, the corporation player controls the EarthGov forces. This also shows what can go on the cycler during a flashpoint. So down here, they're not sending along population because they're not confident that those people will get housed, but they will be willing to send along troops. When it's up high, lots of population comes in, but less troops, because EarthGov's confident that the Martian government can handle the fight. Control of EarthGov can switch between flashpoint rounds. So they can be controlled by the Corp at one point, and then confidence can go up, and that control goes to the Martian government. And this creates a bit of tension between those two players, who are supposedly allies. Now let's do an example of an operation. Here, the Martian government wants to recruit forces, so they want to get extra troops into these regions. They then place up to 4 troops in those regions. So let's just grab all those troops and dump them in. Lots and lots of troops. That's a basic operation. Now, one of those areas they can also pay to reduce opposition or build support. So here they pay more resources to reduce this to neutral, as I made it active opposition before. So let's do a different operation. Now this would be on a different turn, and we're going to do a secure operation which allows us to move troops into labyrinths. So we're going to move a bunch of troops from Tenzing into Shepherd here, and we're also going to move some from Tereshkova. Now as soon as we're done moving, we can reveal enemy rebels. So here we flip these ones over, now they're revealed. Now the thing with rebel units is unless they're revealed, they cannot be attacked. So before this secure action, they're hidden. After the secure action, they're revealed. So on the Red Dust player's turn, they might try to move those units or hide them, because next turn they could be subject to an attack operation. And of course, like all operations, you could do this in multiple areas. So here, we don't necessarily move any troops, but we do sweep to find the hidden ones. So Red Dust is going to do a different type of operation, a campaign operation. So they're going to target these 3 areas, paying 1 resource per area. Now, campaign boosts opposition in that area by 1 step. But if an area is already at active opposition, it allows them to reveal and play a campaign card. These campaign cards are ongoing effects that last until the next dust storm round. So here, water reclamation workers are going on strike. You can only have 2 campaign cards active at any time, but they provide an ongoing drag to the Mars government player in particular. Now, while the Martian government and Red Dust are fighting over population centers and popular support, the corporate player is playing a little bit of a different game. Here they're trying to exploit Nshensu, which allows them to reduce the support in this area to gain profits. Now, profits are victory points for them. They can only do this if there are more of their units in an area than there are other players. So in many ways, the Martian government does like to keep an eye on the corporate player so that they're not eroding their support. And if EarthGov is controlled by the Mars player, EarthGov forces count towards that as well. So EarthGov can keep an eye on corporate players. The other thing the Corp wants to do is flip these bases out in the deserts into their terraforming side. That means you'll be getting terraforming score points. And those are points they can bank. Now, the scope of this game doesn't mean that terraforming will be underway by the end of the game. What it represents is building the infrastructure that will allow for terraforming. And the Reclaimer player, well, their bases, when they're flipped to either side, do different things based on where they are. Inside the city, they represent conversion centers that allow them to take control and swap out other players' pieces for their pieces. In the deserts, they act to counterform terraforming operations. Now, the Reclaimer player also wants to take out these corporate bases, because when they attack an area and remove them, they can replace that base with their own. This represents some re-engineering the terraforming base to counteract terraforming. Another tricky thing they can do if they control more pieces in an area than anyone else is they can do damage to the area to draw an extra card for themselves. Now, this represents them stripping out all of the important machinery and taking it with them from a settlement. This activates one of their units, of course. But these cards, these are what drive the Reclaimers to take extra action. So when other people are spending resources, they're spending points, values, and cards. And when other people play events, the Reclaimers can jump in and use their own events. Subject to the normal rules over here, aside from, if they get to jump in on an event, they can play this event instead of one off the top of the deck. So the Reclaimers have a lot of flexibility that isn't in a normal coin game. Now, a few things to close off. You'll see here an approaching storm marker. That means there's a dust storm coming this way soon. When an area has a raging storm in it, it's essentially removed from the game for a lot of game purposes. You can't target it with actions. It's not that dust storms on Mars will rip you to shreds or anything. It's just that they can be really, really big and disrupt communication and visibility. The one exception to this are the labyrinths. When they're under a raging storm, you can conduct actions inside the labyrinth, but you can't move in and out of it, and you can't use the spaceport. So a final note on victory conditions. The Martian government player wants total population support plus this number of support from Earth, over here on the left, equal to 34 points. The corporate player wants their profit score to get all the way up to 30. Now, the thing with profits is once they're banked, they're very hard to remove. So while it's difficult for the corp player to win very early on, if left to their own devices and not held back, it's quite easy for the corp player to keep banking those profits. Red Dust wants 32 points, and they get that for creating opposition to the government, as we described earlier, plus 1 for each of their bases on the planet. So if they manage to get down 10 bases, they only need 22 points worth of opposition to win. And the Reclaimers, well, they want more bases on the planet than everyone else combined. Now, this can sneak up on people if you're not paying attention. This incentivizes the Reclaimer player to go out into the wilderness and smash up all those bases and take them over. Now, I know that was very much a once over lightly for the game, but I hope it gives you a basic idea of what coin's about and how the interactions work, and just reassures you that the game is being worked on and that it is in quite a playable state. And hopefully the next time you hear from me, it will be because we're announcing that we're sending the game to the printers. And if you have any more questions about Red Dust Rebellion, just let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the notification button, like, share, and subscribe to the channel.